All right, so part two on grief. And I was going to say something else other than what Spirit wanted me to touch on, but um, I guess I'll go into that here in a minute. But, you know, the study of epigenetics talks about how grief is so powerful and how it can permeate through our DNA and change our DNA, loss and grief, that the trauma and the loss that your, what would it be? I think it would be 13 times great grandparents went through. No. Yeah, 13 times great grandparents went through actually has an effect on your own DNA and how you handle grief and life in general. That's how strong loss can be and grief can be. So that would be 14 generations of difference right there. So grief and pain can travel 14 generations down the line. And it's something that we carry in our bones. It's something that we inherently feel. There have been studies with the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and those who didn't survive that ended up having post-traumatic stress disorder when they themselves claimed that they didn't have any real trauma in their life, but their symptomatology and even their fears, their phobias, all across the board seem to be the same. And so when they studied this within the study of epigenetics, they found that all of these different elements just kept adding up with these people who came from very different places, different countries, but all were having these same symptoms, all the same symptomatology and the same fears. And these were all people whose grandparents had gone through the Holocaust and were subject to all of the horrors that occurred within that series of events. And I want to touch really quickly because Spirit was kind of drawing my attention to what happened when I went to Scotland for the first time and went to Dromasi Moor, Culloden. So about 7 years ago was when I found out that I had ancestors who were Scottish, and it would be several years later that I found this giant tree and all of these different names and a lot of intermarriage. And I kept noticing this same date, April 16th, 1746, as the death date for a lot of these different ancestors that were popping up in these different documents. And something obviously happened. And I was just thinking, well, what the hell? What is going on? And then I found out about Culloden, and then someone messaged me one day and said, you should probably check out Outlander because I think that you're going to figure some stuff out with some of the elements of the show. And it just cracked me open. I spent the first few initial days in this huge depression, but I recognized that depression. It was a feeling that I'd carried with me since I was a child. And when I went to Culloden for the first time, I'm going to try not to cry again, because this shit still tears me up. I realized that I was carrying the grief of these family members that were slaughtered and they lost their way of life. And so my life's mission, actually, aside from doing spiritual work, which is very much connected to that side of my family as well, because a lot of folks, a lot of my ancestors that lived in Scotland were also like me. They were gifted and readily embraced all of basically what I do. And I have always been that. I just didn't know that that came from their side or that they even existed and that this was normal for them, what I am. So I felt that connection with them and that grief and have carried it since I was a little girl. And I've always felt displaced. And when I went to Scotland, I felt healthy and balanced, but I was definitely processing these huge pockets of overwhelming, tear your guts inside out, rip your heart in half, make you wonder what the hell life is for kind of grief. And it shook my very foundation. And so when you can carry the grief of your ancestors and you experience your own grief, it can be so powerful that it can reach you 14 generations down the line. That's how strong grief can be. But also, they're kind of stopping me because where do you guys want me to go with this? Okay. It can either, grief, make you so sick that you have physical manifestations of pain with it, aches and pains and getting sick a lot, like the flu or colds, migraines, weight loss, weight gain. It can really change how your body even responds because grief is so strong. But it can also provide an opportunity for healing. And when I was at Culloden, I remember, boy, this is going to be an emotional video. The best revenge is a life well lived, because I hear my ancestors, and I hear them not only in English, but in Gaelic. And what they've taught me through that experience is that I can find a way to have both of my hands on the steering wheel when it comes to processing this grief, and I can keep my eyes open and decide on the turns that I want to make. And that can be really hard when you are inundated, because sometimes that grief feels like being plunged into a tidal wave and you are just trying to get up above the fucking surface and take some kind of breath of air, but you keep getting inundated with the water and being shoved down further and further. And I know that talking about generational trauma and grief and loss is not the same as losing someone really close to you that you love, especially if it's complicated. But I wanted to reference what I learned. And I have definitely spent days where I've sobbed about it and felt really depressed and emotionally overwhelmed and angry and bitter for what happened, and some of the implications that are still very much there in that place and in the country as a whole. I can still see how it affects people now and the way that they function, and how it affects me and the way that I function. But there were certain things that came out of that grief process, and it took me a bit to figure out what to do. So if you have an opportunity to take your grief and funnel it into something that betters your life somehow, that inspires you to embrace your life and living well, living better, making a bucket list and going down the list, really embracing all that you can take control of the process eventually when you have done the shadow work to go through the heavy emotions. And you can make decisions slowly but surely, and take steps slowly but surely to take control of the process and to feel like you have some sense of direction with it. So one of the things that I did was I decided that I was going to live well. I was going to live better. So I was going to take really good care of my health, my emotional and my physical health. I wasn't going to push myself so goddamn hard anymore. I was going to make sure I got plenty of sleep. So, basic health. I was not going to let other people abuse me anymore, take advantage of me anymore. I was going to redefine my worth as a person. I was going to basically take my seat at the fucking table, which is also what I'm doing in making these videos, because I've avoided this for so long. I do not like putting myself out there. But this is part of living well, is embracing who you are and sitting at the table, taking the seat at the table, which is your rightful place. But another one of the things that I decided to do was to take my life and to utilize it to honor my ancestors and to use that grief for something good. So I've been taking classes, post-beginner classes, in which I get to interact with people and speak Gaelic with them. And I'll be taking every single class under the sun until I become fully fluent. And I sing in Gaelic. There are so many songs that I have learned that my ancestors knew and sang. And when I sing that, I feel a bridge between my heart and theirs. And it is the most joyful, healing, emotional, loving thing that I have ever felt. Honestly, it's like existing on another level. I go to Scotland often. This is something that's going to be in my life for the rest of my life, and I'm going to retire there. And I have things that I need to do there. I'm helping others connect with their own history and find their own ancestors so that we can start to heal some of these things, and showing them how to do that and supporting them through that process. I'm speaking about what my ancestors went through and their essence of who they were. I've been reading individual stories on them, because some of them having been at Culloden and been killed, and some of them in different positions that were allowing them to be documented more because of who they were. It allows me to gain personal details and understanding, and to share their stories. And I really try to share the stories of those who were lesser known. And I tap into them, and they tap in with me, and I share intuitively what they share with me and the lesson involved, so it can help other people. So there are so many different elements in which I have learned to take that grief and to turn it around. In my own little corner, keeping the language alive. And just really doing whatever I can to honor them. But that also means honoring yourself. Every single one of us, through what any and all of our ancestors went through, we are, each one of us, an absolute miracle. If you think of plagues, famine, all kinds of shit, warfare, just struggling to survive, we are miracles, every single one of us. It's a miracle that we're even here. A lot of my family was killed at Culloden, or executed a little later on when they were caught. So, I mean, if they hadn't had children beforehand, or if some of them had not survived, I wouldn't even be here. So if you think of that aspect alone, if we each are a miracle, we are each worth taking care of our life and honoring the lives of others. But sometimes it means looking at the grief that we're experiencing and understanding that, yes, we owe ourselves the ability to grieve properly and in the way that we see fit, not allowing people to push us, but also it can allow us to process through all of the grief work that we need to do, but then find ways to enrich our own life and further embrace who we are and embrace the gratitude for ourselves in being that miracle. I feel like I totally just channeled all of that. Wasn't sure where I was going with it, but it seemed to like come together, which is always the case, thank goodness. So grief is so powerful, and broken heart syndrome, that shooting in Uvalde, Texas, the teacher that was killed, her husband ended up dying. I think it was just a day later. It was 24 hours later that he died of a heart attack from the stress. And they did conclude that it was broken heart syndrome. It's a real thing. Grief is so powerful. It's important to take care of yourself and to do this your way. There's a reason why you need to do this your way. You are an individual. You are a miracle of a person. You are an individual. The way that you live is unlike, truly, in so many different minute facets, different than how other people live. Even if you have similarities with those around you, there's a certain way that you walk through the world, and it's meant for you. The ways that you honor yourself and the people around you, and your unique traits and all the things that you inherited. You are a miracle. And so you owe yourself that ability to honor who you are, but also to honor when you need time to properly grieve. And that can be really hard. But allowing yourself to feel what you feel without pressuring yourself, because you have changed when you've lost someone. And there is that saying of, we never really get over grief. We just learn to shoulder it differently. And that's so true. We adapt through our life experiences, and grief is one of the greatest things, like the heaviest. Like when I say greatest, I mean like the largest, one of the most heaviest, most profound things that we have to incur in a lifetime. And there are parts of us that can break, parts of us that feel like they're missing. And when grief is so powerful that it can cause someone to pass away, like with the example of broken heart syndrome, we really need to be mindful that this is a journey. And it's going to require the time that it's going to require, and we cannot dictate that. I mean, we truly can't. We just have to let it run its course and find a way to shoulder it differently, in a way that we can not only survive, but to get eventually from surviving to thriving again. And that may seem like a hell of a thing to take on when we are suffering through the process, but it is possible. You just have to give yourself the opportunity to do it your way.